My name's Katie Visick. I'm the Florida State Director at On the Line. We have been educating people on redistricting for about 2 years. We're an affiliate with the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, which is chaired by Eric Holder. So you may have heard of that organization. And so we have been doing a lot of outreach and education, but now we're at the point where our maps are very close to final. So our state legislative maps, that's our state house and our state Senate seats, those were officially passed in the legislature this week. That being said, they're not official because they get to be reviewed by the Supreme Court still. And then our congressional map, if you're following the news on this, has come to a screeching halt because Governor DeSantis, in a very unusual step, has introduced his own congressional map and is now trying to go to the Florida Supreme Court to try to get rid of some minority opportunity districts in North Florida, specifically Congressional District 5. He's also, reduced minority seats in Central Florida and in the South Florida area. And so while that map is not official, what we're doing On the Line and the National Democratic Redistricting Committee is we're trying to talk to folks now that we're in this final stage, and we're trying to see if anyone's interested in being a plaintiff. So if anyone here has experience with that, that can vary. You can sign on to a lawsuit and it's as easy as that. Sometimes you're asked to testify. So if anyone here is interested in doing that, I'm just going to drop in the chat. And this is by no means a commitment because I know we don't have a lot of time here today to talk about this, but I put a form in. So if you're interested in learning more about the redistricting process, I'm happy to talk to you about it. Happy to talk to you about what our current maps look like. And then if you're interested in maybe being a plaintiff or other people who might be interested, go ahead and fill out this form and then I will connect with you. And then if you're interested, the next step would be to talk to our litigation team.
In 2018, I was still in office as a council person in the city of Riviera Beach. At that time, the Chief Clarence Williams was the chief of police. He's on this call, and he and I worked together to host a summer youth employment program, one of which he had done in his past life and one that I had been a part of for so many years from high school on up. Always thought it was a good idea for our kids to be introduced to employability skills as well as different types of careers. As we prepared for this, the school district 2018 had 400 kids that were poised for certificates of attendance. Certificates of attendance cannot be used to get into college, vocational school, or even the military. So at that time, there was an idea that we could take the kids who had not passed the standardized test. If they came to the program, they would still get their stipend. So we hired 2 school district certified teachers to host this boot camp to get these kids ready so that they could pass the standardized test. That is the only reason those kids were being given certificates of attendance as opposed to being given a general high school diploma. So imagine this. You have 400 kids with the potential of not graduating, of not going to college, not being educated. So at least 10%, 40 of those kids will end up in the criminal justice system. Those kids will continue to feed the pipeline to prison system. All of this is just about economics. I had never seen a group of people get so angry because you are hosting a boot camp for standardized testing for children. The community, I think at that time when this first happened, didn't see what the cost was, or they did not see what the ultimate price was when the kids did not pass the standardized testing. They didn't graduate. So there was a move to file charges against me at the state attorney's office, the Office of Inspector General, also at the Ethics Commission. It didn't fly with the state attorney dropped it. But what he said when he dropped it was The reason he was dropping it was because the Office of Inspector General was picking it up. For me, that was not an exoneration. If there's no merit to it, then there's no merit to it. Let that be the reason that you drop it. Office of Inspector General ended up dropping it, saying that they were going to let the Ethics Commission handle it. If there was nothing to be handled, then say that. There still, again, was no exoneration. So we're still fighting this today, my attorney and I, to prove that there is nothing wrong, there was nothing wrong with our kids getting a standardized test boot camp in the community. The ultimate goal for me telling you this story here today is this. It's the fact I want people to see how far people will go to continue to keep these children tracked and pushed in this pipeline to prison. They will crucify anybody that goes up against it. And a lot of, I know at some point, a lot of our elected officials, a lot of our community leaders won't say anything because they're not willing to pay the same price. But I think for our kids' sake, we have to open our mouth and say, we need to bring the resources to bear, all the resources that we have to protect our kids from not graduating, to help them to graduate. And what they did to bring these charges against me, because they said as an elected official, as a council person, that I had stepped outside of my role, that wasn't my role, that was for the school district to do. School district had things in place. If the school district had things in place, they were not all that the kids need, because they were on a list to receive a certificate of attendance. And I think all of us need to be outraged by that. And the fact that until all of us are outraged by this type of stuff, it will continue to happen. Even if it's not affecting you, you got to be equally as mad and outraged about it in order to stop things from this nature from happening, for people who speak out from being attacked.
Same problem 30 years later.
How many juveniles were arrested by the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice last year?
45,366 juveniles, according to Orlando Sentinel. The Florida Department of Juvenile Justice said 45,366 juveniles were arrested in fiscal year 2019-20, a 17% decline from the 2018-2019 fiscal year when 54,885 youth were arrested.
Those are the stats for the juveniles arrested. Actually, the fiscal year last year, it's down 17% because of COVID. As you know, in our state, that with that many juvenile arrests, 65% of them were Black boys and girls. We're talking from the age of 5 to 17, with 58,000 arrests of juveniles. If you want to put it in comparison and look at Texas, a state twice the size of Florida. Again, if you look at the stats and you put them in comparison, over 58,772 5 to 17-year-olds arrested in the state of Florida last year, 65% Black boys and girls, no doubt. And a state of Texas, which is twice the size of Florida, only arrested 40,000 adults. We had 94,000 adults currently incarcerated in the state of Florida. So as you can see, twice as many adults, and we arrested more juveniles than adults. The importance of that is this. When you look at the arrest of these young kids, it's mostly primarily out of the schools. And that's how you come up with the school to prison pipeline, is what it's called. And what's happening is because of their implicit bias and their lethal Black skin, they're being arrested and incarcerated more than their other counterparts. If you look at any of these school districts, less than 20% of Black people. I'm talking about Blacks, not minorities. Less than 20% of Blacks. But the Blacks represent 80 to 90% of all the arrests, expulsions, suspensions, and detentions. I'm not saying they're not bad, but spread some of that around. Don't just put it on one population. Also, when you talk about the analogy of a juvenile arrest, that's a juvenile arrest record, which means no military, no student aid, and no jobs. And the 13th Amendment allows them to turn men to slave because if they get 2 more juvenile arrests, now they become a felon. And they become state property because they lose all their constitutional and civil rights. That goes right to the core of our future voters. People, this is chess. This is not checkers. They're going after the babies while we're looking at the redistricting and the voting stuff that they're doing. They're going after the babies to make sure we can't reproduce. But I'm talking about reproduce. I'm talking about reproducing young voters. I'm 58 years old. I'm not going to live forever. Those young kids I just quoted are going to be replacing me as a representative and as a voter to look out for the rights, the democratic rights of the stuff that we all fight for every day. When you look at the funding, I'll keep it brief because I can go on forever. The funding mechanism is simple. In Pinellas County last year, Pinellas County School District put out 272 kids. When I mean put out, I'm talking about expulsion, and I'm talking about putting into juvenile commitment programs. That's a sexy word for locking up babies. They call it a commitment program. Okay, 272. If you take 272, okay, times 7,800, that's the per pupil funding they get per kid. And hit equal, that comes out to $2.1 million. $2.1 million of kids they put out. Now, that is primarily on school policy. That's all that is. They come up with this thing when the kids come home from the first day of school, they got a handful of papers. Then that handful of papers is something called a code of conduct. That's the code of conduct for the entire county school district, okay? So when I talk about implicit bias, you look at fighting. It speaks to fighting. If a Black kid gets in a fight down in a low-income area, he gets a ride to juvie jail. If a white kid gets in a fight in the affluent neighborhood, he gets a detention. It's all fight. A fight is a fight is a fight, but one is getting a permanent juvenile record, one's getting a detention. The reason other kids getting a detention because you can't get into Harvard with a juvenile arrest record. That's the skinny of it. But if you take back to the funding, if you take this $2.1 million, and the statute is clear on that, the statute says once a juvenile is put into a juvenile commitment program, okay, then the school district, then the general fund is to transfer the money from the last school district in which that child attended into the Department of Juvenile Justice. That's money. So that's $2.1 million coming out of the Pinellas County School District going to the Department of Juvenile Justice for juvenile jail beds. And the Department of Juvenile Justice has in their budget, not now, but RAT now, R-A-T now, $88.6 million for juvenile jail beds. People, this is an industry. This is a huge industry. And they're using our babies to fund it, and they're taking out future voters in the process. If you want to put it in comparison, when you got an adult in our adult system, 94,000 adults, I'm switching over to adults now. If one of them get COVID and get a terminally ill disease, we have this thing called compassionate release, and I call it BS, because we don't want to pay the medical bills, and we dang sure don't want to bury them. So we send them home to you with 2 weeks left to live. Once that person, and you get all excited, Jimmy's home, we throw a party, we throw a barbecue, and 2 weeks later, boom, Jimmy's dead. Once Jimmy transpires, they can reach into that pool of 58,000 babies, pluck one out at 14, put him in that bed and keep the party going. This is an industry, people, industry. And they're fueling it with our babies while we're out looking at everything else. Like I said, it's chess, it's not checkers. You probably haven't heard about this. The young lady before me, Lynn, spoke eloquently on it, but it's worse than that. It's worse than, because if you look at what's happened to these babies, it's criminal. But this is the one county, $2.1 million. Now, if you take that and multiply it by 67, because it's 67 counties, 67 school boards, okay, that 2.1 million that I just talked about, times 67, it comes out to approximately $140 million. That's give or take, because some are arresting more, some are arresting less. That's how much money to their school policies, not the legislature, their school policies through their implicit bias toward Black kids that they're using to put kids into the system every day. And that's what's going on. The reason I did the Google thing up in the front to show you that it's down to 45,000 from 58 is because of COVID, they couldn't arrest kids while they were home on a Zoom. You can't get them while they're home on a Zoom. And I'll close with this. When you talk about, they all once asked Bonnie and Clyde, why do they rob banks? And Bonnie and Clyde said, that's where the money's at. Well, the Department of Juvenile Justice is tasked with arresting juveniles. Juveniles aren't running around the street corners, they're in the schools. And that's where they get them at, these implicit bias policies. And it's unfortunate, but we've got to make sure we're more focused on this. My fight has been in the legislature. We were able to get the adjudication age. We tried to fight to get that from 14 to 16. That's the age they put them in with adults. And that got beat down because the lobbyists got access to that 88.6 million juvenile jail bed money, which is privately funded for private juvenile facilities. And that didn't happen, but we were able to get the petty theft up from $300 up to $700. That's any constellation, because if a kid takes an iPhone, that's $1,000. That's instant felony by just taking an iPhone. But we were able to get that moved to 700. We also were able to, with the individuals that are currently incarcerated through licensing, we were able to get them, if they complete a career or in engineering or barbering or any skilled trade that they can go out and make a living in, we will give them a license before they leave this, before they leave jail and return to society, so they can start working. They won't be forced with a scarlet letter that keeps them forever from returning into society and being able to work because of a felony. So we're able to accomplish those two things. There's more needs to be done. My advocacy is on early childhood education. I brought home $4.5 million every year for HIPPY, which is home instructions to parents for preschool youth. 0 to 5 is the most critical age of a young child's mind development. We can teach them after that, but it costs more money and more resources. If you heard the stats, 5 to 17 is the arrest. 0 to 5 is they're trying to develop their mind. And lastly, the school year, kids from 1 to 3, they're learning to read. From grades 1 to 3, they're learning to read. And from 3 up, they're reading to learn. That's where the gap comes in at, because if they start handing them assignments and they can't read them, then how are they going to complete them? And that's where the gap comes in at. On here, if they hand all of us a Chinese menu, I'm probably going to go hungry because I can't read Chinese. But I want to thank Carlton. I joke about him a lot, but he does have a passion for these youth. I'm glad he gave me a platform by which to respond upon this. It's going on. I mean, you heard it not from me, from Google. A lot of people say that's just new and saying stuff, but those aren't my stats. Those are their stats. And those are babies, 45,336, 5 to 17 years old with permanent juvenile record. Imagine that.
I want to thank Representative Newton. You've been saying things that I have dealt with my whole law enforcement career. People would ask me, what do you think? And I said, just follow the money. When you follow the money, you get answers. Yeah. And then people want to blame politics, but no, just follow the money and you will see how it scopes out further down the road. For me, it's over a 40-year law enforcement commitment. I used to fight it all the time in wondering why we're doing certain things in law enforcement, treating kids on drugs and educating kids about drugs, because that was my expertise. And it was, I'd hit a dead end and just said it's not good policy. No, it didn't bring in good money. That was the truth. Right. We've got to challenge every politician. We have to bring this awareness. When I was I busted people for drugs. I thought that was the best thing to do from my military and law enforcement. I was arresting people for drugs. Didn't make much sense to me because they were out the next day. So I said, okay, when I worked with the school system, I was the first one to teach children about drugs in kindergarten. And they went, Superintendent Tom Mills at the time said, Gary, you cannot teach children about drugs in kindergarten. I said, yes, I can, and I need to. I said, come with me to my kindergarten class and I'll show you. He came with me with a school board member and I went, hi kids, and they were all excited. I said, name the good drugs that we put in our body. And they raised their hands and said, vitamins, aspirin, cough syrup, what the doctor gives you. I said, great. Now tell me all the bad drugs. Reefer. My mama smokes reefer. My daddy got cocaine at home, G.I. Joe, because that's what they called me. And I said, I just looked at the teacher and Superintendent Mills, and he gave me a thumbs up and said, you got to do it. Was it that bad? Maybe. So as I taught, I said, okay, but then I found out that there were kids not getting help in the minority community. So I became the executive director of a drug treatment program for children. And the bottom line is that gangs always have openings. They always have job openings. Gangs have openings all the time. I mean, what they do, they give these kids the opportunity to be part of a family, which every child when they're born needs. So the gangs are not stupid. Now, how do they get their money? They get them from drugs. When I was with the school board, I actually spoke to a very high level drug cartel person in Colombia. And he was very candid. He said, you Americans still don't get it after all these years. And then when I die, it's going to keep going. He said, if you kill the demand, the supply goes away. But if you don't deal with that demand, then supply is going to continue. Crime will continue. Drug sales will continue. And it's kind of strange that it hit me that way. And I said, yeah, it's making sense to me as it boils over. I know how Chief Williams feels about community policing. It's a good buzzword. The chief and I, and even when I was chief in Pahokee, we always told our commissioners that we're going to implement community policing. What is community policing? What kind of help does it give, and where does it point for diversity? It's time we hold our politicians accountable. We always say that, but do we really do it? Do we really challenge them on the money? Take a look at their campaign contributions. See who gives them the money. It's not going to take long once the session's open for that person to stand up and maybe institute some type of policy. When I was with the sheriff's office, we opened up something called a boot camp. Now, it was military based for these 13, 14, 15-year-olds. But like Representative Newton said, these were second and third time felony offenders. I can tell you what we did. We broke the cycle. How? We put them in a new family. My drill instructors, when these kids would graduate after just 6 months, I wanted to keep them forever. They would wear mirrored sunglasses because they didn't want to see the crowd of the kids watch them crying. Because they were crying because they want to know what's going to happen to my kid. I've spent all this time, they're getting straight A's. They're respectful. They care about each other. What's going to happen to them now? We just keep putting a Band-Aid on stuff. I'm fortunate. I had a great career in law enforcement. But I just want to thank you, all of you, for the hard work that you do. I've asked Marion for an application. I want to join your group. I want to help you in any way that I can. My commitment is there. And I just want to thank Carlton for the invitation.
Just to keep anything factual in order, I want to pay homage to our former chair, Ms. Terry Rizzo. She's on the call. Her and I fought tirelessly in the trenches in Tallahassee. We went all over the state advocating for democratic rights and also the babies, because that's what it's all about. I want to acknowledge her and thank her for the work that she's done and continue to do.
If I may, Carlton, if I may also, I'd just like to thank Representative Newton for getting on this call and especially addressing this important topic. It is really great to see you, Rep. Newton. Thank you. Thank you for keeping up the fight.
Thank you.